Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 23rd of November 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you around 20 minutes of gaming news and comment. Coming up later in the show, the Wii U selling at a loss, but not by much. THQ takes one step forward and two steps back, with great news and, well, not so great news. Activision releasing $50 iOS Skylanders game, Peter Molyneux and 22 Cans with a Kickstarter for a Populous successor, and new story arcs for the Secret World coming soon. Nintendo of America President Reggie, I'm not even going to try that surname. I keep screwing that up every single time. He's Reg. He's the big Reg. That's all you really need to know, right? Yes, Mr. Reggie, President Reggie of Reggieland and also Nintendo, has revealed that although the Wii U is selling at a loss, it pushes it into profit once a single game has been purchased, which would indicate that the amount of loss actually being made on every single unit is really not that large at all if the game margin is enough to push it over. The news that the console would be selling at a loss came as a surprise to a lot of people because that is not something Nintendo generally does, although in the last couple of years they seem to have been forced into that position by changing markets, with the 3DS being slashed in price by a great deal and the Wii U being launched initially at a loss. Now, while it might be unusual for Nintendo, it's certainly not unusual for the market in general. New consoles are generally sold at a loss. That is the way that it is. It's simply because the manufacturing costs initially are very, very high, but once they've started to refine the process and the components end up getting cheaper over time as they get older, it is possible to then sell the consoles at a profit, which then also supports further price drops for the hardware. Most of the time, there is an expectation that if you buy a new console, you will also buy games with it, you will buy accessories with it, and so on and so forth, which will help push each individual sale, or so-called basket, into profit. In the case of the Wii U, it's fairly likely that most of these units were in fact sold for a profit, simply as a result of the fact that the basic unit does not actually come with any games. In the case of the Wii, it came with Wii Sports, which was a game that, for the most part, was the only thing that ended up in the drives of anyone that actually bought a Wii. Not exactly an ideal situation, is it, if the pack-in game is the only game you end up playing? Now, while there are arguments that the Wii U launch lineup is fairly strong, it's also safe to say that a lot of it consists of ports, and some of them are really good. Apparently the Mass Effect 3 port is great, as is the Assassin's Creed 3 port and the Darksiders 2 port. However, Batman Arkham City has some frame rate issues every now and again, and there are several companies coming out claiming that the CPU is a little behind the times, as it were. The question, I suppose, has to be, is there going to be a significant game attachment rate? Because the original Wii had actually one of the lowest attachment rates of all time, with each Wii being sold in total, this is not when it was bought, this is in total across the lifespan of the machine, with 1.5 games per person. That is really bad. That's incredibly bad. An attachment rate of 1.5 is one of the lowest I've certainly ever heard of. So the question is, will there be enough sales with the launch lineup to make this work here for Nintendo? Zombie U is, of course, a strong title, which seems to be selling a lot. There are a couple of ports which have additional content, such as Scribblenauts Unlimited and Tekken Tag 2. Nintendo Land is a game that is being sold separately if you buy the basic console, which is what the majority of people are getting because there aren't all that many premium editions. And of course, there is new Super Mario Bros. Wii U, which is a strong seller across the board for the launch lineup. So it is very possible that this console will end up making a profit initially, but I think it's also going to come down to how many strong releases we get in the next few months, because there is this limited window before the new consoles come out that Nintendo must exploit to the fullest potential if they wish to actually do well. THQ is continuing to suffer financial problems. However, there is a little bit of good news in the fact that Wells Fargo, an American financial institution, has agreed to postpone its threats to default on one of THQ's loans and has given them up to January the 15th to attempt to keep up with the payments. Wells Fargo has even claimed that they may lend additional money to THQ in the interim, which indicates at least some confidence that THQ may be able to rise out of its current financial difficulties. In addition to this, THQ has announced that they're currently in negotiations with a new major money sponsor, which may be able to provide an additional source of revenue for the company. The company has, however, lost its chief financial officer, Paul Pacino, in the process. There is no replacement named at this time. Now, you might view that as a bad thing, but actually, it seems that the stock prices for THQ are rising slightly, and indeed, after the news that the CFO had left the company, the stock prices and market confidence did have a slight increase. As to why that would be, well, the CFO generally gets blamed for all of this nonsense, so when you dump the bad apples, you can get a little bit more confidence from the marketplace. The share price is, of course, a very important thing and continues to hover dangerously low at this time. However, it would appear, at least, that there is some good news on the THQ front. In the short term, however, these financial woes are actually beneficial to the consumer, with many THQ products going on ridiculously low sale on Steam, Amazon, and a wide variety of other retailers. So if you want to pick up recent THQ games like Darksiders 2, this would definitely be the time to do it. Activision is going all in, it seems, with this whole Skylanders thing, and has announced that it's releasing Skylanders Battlegrounds at a $49.99 retail price. Now, before you guys go crazy, the reason for this is that it comes with a so-called Portal of Power wireless device. In other words, the thing that you stick the toys in, 3 Skylanders toys, and the redemption code to get the game on the App Store. This game is also currently available as a standalone application, and the description in the iOS store indicates that the physical device is very much optional. This would certainly be the most expensive iOS game I've seen thus far, although it is, of course, a little bit misleading. It's not a case of just releasing a game on iOS for $15 or $20, or in this case, $50. It is a case of selling a physical item with a code for redemption, as well as a bunch of the Skylanders toys and the actual wireless device. Now, this thing is designed to connect to iOS devices via Bluetooth. It is detected that way, and you are able to bring your Skylanders into the game, which is not something you've been able to do with iOS titles in the Skylanders franchise up to this point. And it's this really weird hybrid business model that is questionable, I suppose, but it's still interesting, because honestly, we've gotten to the point where mobile versions on iOS devices are very popular, and yet most of them are very much cut down or complete spin-offs of the full titles. So here you've got this crossover where you're able to use the Skylanders toys with an iOS game, and it brings it closer to actually being a legitimate product. It just happens to be for a different format. A lot of these games even released as promotional tools. Cloud Patrol is essentially designed to sell toys. It is a little game. It's essentially got nothing to do with the franchise whatsoever, really, aside from the fact that it uses characters within it. The gameplay is nothing like the original Skylanders game at all, and yet Skylanders Battlegrounds, well, that's a different matter entirely. It's an intriguing idea, and I have to wonder if this whole peripheral thing could be expanded into other genres. I would love to see it be used for a collectible card game or some kind of miniatures game. Being able to play a variant of HeroClix with your friends across the world utilizing one of these would be awesome, but since HeroClix do not have those RF transponders in it, that's not going to work out so well. I'd love to be able to play a version of the X-Wing miniatures game by Fantasy Flight. Hell, go as far as Warhammer 40,000, as if that would ever happen. One way or the other, it's interesting tech, there's no question about that, and this thing seems to be selling a huge amount without question, so it's not something that you can really argue with. People are buying into this in a really big way, although it does remain to be seen as to whether or not people will pay full price for an iOS release, even if it does come with these physical products. Peter Molyneux and his new studio 22 Cans is attempting to crowdfund Project Goddess, which is supposedly going to be a spiritual successor to the original Populous. He's looking to raise £450,000, which is approximately $717,000, to develop this game, and it's expected to launch within a year for mobile devices and PC, with other platforms being added, assuming that the stretch goals are met. Molyneux is quoted as saying that what he would love to do is go back to the glory days of Bullfrog, go back to when we focused ultimately on the gameplay, and with the team at 22 Cans and your help and direction, we can recreate the entire God game genre. At the time of recording, Project Goddess is currently at £116,000 out of its £450,000 goal after a couple of days, although the project so far has drawn some criticism. The logic behind the criticism is that because Peter Molyneux has a small personal fortune, he shouldn't be going to Kickstarter in order to fund this particular game. It's an interesting point of view, is it not? One has to wonder if you can trust Peter Molyneux not to screw this up. There have been a lot of promises from Peter Molyneux, honestly. A lot of promises. How many of them have actually been fulfilled, one has to wonder. Not a huge number. I believe there came a time when he stopped focusing on the actual games and started focusing on these pie-in-the-sky ideas that never really materialized. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty much through listening to him as to what's going to be in his next game. game, and I am far more willing simply to look at the title when it comes out, and then I will decide as to whether or not it is worth my time. However, I do not agree with the criticism that someone like Peter Molyneux should not be on Kickstarter. Indeed, there was an absolute rampage from Rab Florence, who you may know as the journalist who was unfortunately let go from Eurogamer after his article about gaming journalism bias and, of course, Square Enix was amended and edited under legal threats by one of the journalists named in that particular article. Now, as much as I have sympathy for Rab Florence, I don't have sympathy for this article because it's goddamn stupid. A quote from his Tumblr: "They will kill it. Be in no doubt these established industry veterans who could achieve their goals through traditional paths will kill Kickstarter with their greed. Their greed! These capitalist animals, Molyneux and Braben, to name but two." Oh my god, wow. That... You know, I know Molyneux's a bit of a twat at times, but Braben? Seriously? "Oh yes, we can very easily fund a sequel to Elite through traditional paths." Yeah, that sounds great. The space sim genre hasn't been dead for the past 10 years or anything. Clearly, they're going to be able to fund a sequel through a traditional publisher to a game that came out on the 20th of September 1984. That would be about 3 months after I was born, I might add, on the BBC Micro Model B and Acorn Electron machines. Yes, my oh my, traditional publishers do seem incredibly receptive to this kind of genre. This is why, of course, we're getting one every 6 months. Oh wait, no we aren't. Nobody is making them, nobody is bloody funding them either. It goes on, if you can believe it. We are being exploited. Molyneux and Braben have been using the same marketing trick too. Braben goes back to the space games we always wanted him to return to. Molyneux returns to the God games. They're both saying, "Hey guys, we're giving you what you wanted, now let's do this thing together." It's a trick. I'm sorry, a trick? Is it been a trick that over the last 10 to 15 years we basically haven't had a single worthwhile God game? Is it a trick that space sims have been dead for the past decade? Is it a trick that console domination has resulted in smaller games and very specific narrow genres as opposed to the big sprawling games of old that were PC focused? Is that a trick? Who's doing the tricking? Who is the master trickster in this particular thing? No, Rab Florence is talking out of his arse. Now, I might understand that he's a little bit upset after the whole debacle, and I don't blame him. Yeah, he got the raw end of the deal. That was not fair at all. He did not deserve that, but this is bollocks. And if you actually take this seriously, then one has to wonder if there's a bit of a trick by Rab Florence in order to exploit the sympathy that he's been receiving to peddle his absolute worthless bullshit onto the masses. Here's how Kickstarter works. And yes, this has turned into a rant, and rightfully so, because someone with the experience of Rab Florence shouldn't be writing this crap. Kickstarter is about someone coming to the front with an idea, saying, "We have the means to make this, assuming we can get the funding. This is our pitch. Please fund us." And people will express their opinion on that pitch by either funding it or not funding it. That's it. That is where the line is drawn. Don't give me this nonsense about preserving the indie ecosystem on Kickstarter. Here's what indie means. This is the only definition of indie that matters. This game ain't published by a publisher. That's it. Done. That is the only thing that defines whether or not a game is indie or not. It is the only properly definable and quantifiable aspect that you can look at and say, this is indie and this isn't, because everything else will degrade into pointless squabbling over just how indie it is, and it's disgusting. It's a completely pointless thing to look at. It's a dumb debate. So yes, you can go on Kickstarter and say, we were the guys that brought you this game like 20 years ago. We can't get publisher funding because they can't get publisher funding. There is no conspiracy here. The only conspiracy is that publishers don't want to fund stuff that isn't going to be a surefire success. They have a very narrow view of what is a good product to sell and what is not. Space sims, God games, isometric tactical party-based RPGs, these are things that do not fit within that narrow definition. They are not to be found on the shelf that is labeled, "This is guaranteed money." I could not care less about the indie cred of people on Kickstarter. What I care about is whether or not the product looks good and whether or not I want it. And, of course, whether or not the team can deliver. You want to know who can deliver? Established teams that know what they're doing. You want to know what's a risk? Backing something by a team that hasn't done a damn thing in the past. And the reality of the situation is the only thing that really matters on Kickstarter is whether or not you are willing to fund it. If consumers are willing to put money behind big names that want to make classic games based on stuff that they did in the past and they got very well known for and yet are unable to do in the current market because no publisher will fund it, then as far as I'm concerned, Kickstarter is doing its job very well indeed. It seems to me, unfortunately, that when Rab Florence was forced to leave Eurogamer, he was also forced to leave his journalistic integrity with it. And finally, the Secret World is still chugging along quite nicely by the looks of it. It has had some problems with its player base, no question about that, and it wasn't by no means the success that EA and Funcom were hoping for. However, updates continue to roll out for this game. Funcom has announced Issue 5, which is another major content update, which will, unlike previous updates, contain a story arc that involves a new character by the name of Tyler Freeborn, a conspiracy theorist caught on Solomon Island during the incursion of the so-called Fog. It's also going to introduce a new auxiliary weapon type, as well as make investigation missions repeatable for those who wish to avoid combat and focus on puzzle solving and story. The last major content update, Episode 4, was delayed as a result of need for further testing, but is now live on the Secret World servers. It is good to see this continuing to truck along because while I didn't have a chance to play a huge amount of it, I do admire the fact that they took some very interesting roads when it comes to diversifying the MMO genre. The combat system was pretty lousy. Even after the updates after release, it still isn't really all that fun to play. In beta, it was mediocre to be kind to it, and if I was wanting to be cruel, I would say that it was just a lousy combat system in general. But the storytelling is a very interesting part of the game. The puzzle solving is a very interesting part of the game. The whole conspiratorial nature of the game ties into the way the quests work, which is actually a very nice piece of game design indeed. Making those quests repeatable, I'm not really convinced about that because it kind of dilutes the whole thing. You're essentially just repeating the same puzzle over and over again for experience. That doesn't seem great at all, although I can definitely see why they're doing it as a short-term stopgap for those who really don't want to be involved in the awful combat. Now, for those asking whether or not this game is going free to play anytime soon, well, in October, the guys behind it said, nope, not going to be doing that anytime soon, although I have to wonder if they'll be able to maintain that, especially with the transition through to free to play that EA's other MMO, which is of course Star Wars The Old Republic, recently took. The Secret World really didn't launch in the best kind of way. It cost a lot of money to buy on launch. It was a full-priced release. You then had to pay $15 a month, and then after that there was also a cash shop in the game from day one, which as far as I'm concerned is something you should never do when you are charging both for the box and for a mandatory subscription. This is not a free-to-play game with an optional subscription. It's a mandatory sub required to actually play the game, and as far as I'm concerned, and this is what I said with World of Warcraft when they released their ridiculous pets and mounts, if you are paying a subscription, then you should be getting everything. Absolutely everything. That's where all the content development should go. There should not be a team focused on building content for people that want to pay more money for the game they're already paying monthly for. That, as far as I'm concerned, is ridiculous. It's a shame that the Secret World isn't all that popular. As I said, it's got some really cool ideas behind it. I think that when it does eventually go free to play, which will happen at some point, then it's probably going to experience a great deal more success. But it used an old business model for a new kind of MMO. It seems to me that unless your name is World of Warcraft, you simply cannot do that anymore. Okay, folks, that's me done for the content patch. Thank you very much for watching. Quick FYI, I'll be traveling to Vegas next week to do IPL 5. I'm going to be there probably for about a week. I expect, hopefully, to keep up with the content patch. There will also be some pre-recorded content that I've created prior to leaving. If necessary, I'll bring in guest hosts for the show, but I believe I should have enough time to record this daily. Have a great weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed your Thanksgiving. If you were in the US, if you were not, then you couldn't give a toss. Understandably so. I'll see you next time.